Hello my little earthlings, and in today's video we're going to be talking about creating compelling characters. So before we get started in today's video, I would like to ask you guys to subscribe and like this video if you want to see more content like it. It really helps me out and helps out my channel. It also helps out other fellow creators to find this content easier, so that way we are all helping all around. So let's just jump into it. So when we're writing compelling characters, I always say it's best to write what you learn and not just what you know. And the reason why I say this is for a few reasons, but let's jump in the first thing. So why do some characters feel more compelling than others? So to me, what ends up generating a flat character or an unconvincing character would typically be one that it's like the creator's naivety about the character's motivations are lack. It's almost like the creator doesn't actually know enough about their own character to write them from a genuine place. This also can happen from projection. So when we've talked about previously that our feelings are always right, but the way we interpret it could be wrong because the interpretation is informed by our beliefs. And so a lot of people, especially the early writings, if you see a lot of early fan fictions or things like that, then you'll see a lot of Mary Sue writing. So Mary Sue writing basically is a character that's just too perfect, or like they have no flaws, or it seems like every event in the story is too coincidental in the way that it seems to be in favor of the main character, like as if the main character can never fail or do anything like too detrimental. Even the worst things always sort of play out well in favor of them in a way that feels like there wasn't even any real stakes. So therefore the believability goes out the window. An example of something like this would probably be Twilight. That's a great one. There's a whole YouTube video that actually twists the plotline where it says, wow, like what if Bella always was able to control all the characters? Because the way it's written, because she is sort of written like a Mary Sue, you do kind of see that Bella, she says what she wants and she always finds a way to get it. So even though she seemed like the character in the most amount of danger, she was actually the least amount of danger the entire story. And the opposite example of something like this, which I don't really know if there's a name for it, but it would, to me, it's just pure chaos writing, where once again the creators don't seem to care and or know very much about their characters. So on the extreme other end of this, you've got something like Game of Thrones, where you've got so much believability in the ways that you can't trust that the creators won't kill off people that you care about, that you believe the stakes are real. And you can do this to the point where now it's just like people watching a train wreck at this point. So they're not watching it because they care a lot about the characters. They watch it for sort of like what is going to happen to the character and how are they going to get destroyed, basically. And kind of more like they're kind of hoping the character won't get destroyed, but it's like so highly likely because nothing feels safe. It just feels like it goes to the other end. And specifically like with the end of Game of Thrones, how they don't take in the character's growth or change, and then therefore their arcs kind of flop, and that can be really bad. So I'm going to move into some tips on developing more compelling characters, and some of these things would be not probably be typical things that are talked about in videos about creating compelling characters, and that's because I come at this from an angle of psychology and not as a writer. So I am a writer, I am a storyteller, I'm a webcomicer, like first and foremost, storyteller probably second, but I haven't done a lot of studying or reading about storytelling, except for like the most basic things. So I know about like the 8-part story circle model, and I will be doing a video explaining how I like to use that to make it work for my stories. But I basically have basic knowledge of that, and I've watched a few YouTube videos on tips to make story writing better. So that's about it. I don't have a lot of background in story, but I have dug deep into answering that question for myself on how can I make my characters in E.T. Girl more compelling. And lately I had this huge sort of dilemma that I kind of took the dilemma and used it as a learning opportunity. So The first thing I used was basing it off a real person. This was a tip I got from a friend of mine, and I noticed that this was his primary way of writing. And this was not the way that I approached writing. When I would write characters from nothing, like just out of thin air, and it wasn't like I did it particularly well either. I kind of knew that I wrote them sort of like a shell that I was going to fill in with knowledge as I got to know the character better or as I gained experience. But when I used this method of basing the characters off real people, I could have those people to reference for their real life behaviors and actions. I could look at their real life and or what I perceive to be their flaws in order to interpret and make a caricatured version, almost you could say, of them, and then kind of have free reign of that to the point where it's not really them anymore, but now it's mine because I've adapted and changed it so much. But it still holds life to it because it's based in something real. So you feel that genuineness at the core of it. And this particularly was, I would say, like the best example of like where this was a problem for me with ET Girl was Ramona. Yeah, you could say she's based off of me. But even when I had written her that way, she has the qualities and traits that are slightly different than mine in a way that perhaps it's my inner self, but learning how to bring that outwardly and make that my outer self was really hard to learn how to do. So, but she did read as the most compelling character because she was based off of me, because I know myself best. As all of us, we know ourselves best, even if we are still forever learning about ourselves and, all of that. We've got that inner bank of knowledge that we can go in and look at if we choose to. Now, writing Fergus was not as compelling because I didn't have anyone I based him off of. He was just sort of he actually was one of the hardest characters to write. I had redone his character design several times over the years. I waited on revealing him in the story until I felt I was drawing him correctly, and even then I look back and like his head was still too big. I had to like go back and get that all worked out, but I just kept it rolling like the minute I gained some kind of confidence in saying, okay, I think I can do this. But yeah, his character still lacked compelling aspects because part of it was I was unclear on his motivations, and I also was fearful of giving him flaws because I wasn't sure how I could write him out of that corner if I wrote him into that corner of having flaws. Like, how can I make him have flaws but also make him a character that people are going to like in the story? Like, if I just write him with flaws too much, he's going to become an unlikable character. So I have to know how to get myself out of the same mess I get myself into, which means I would have to understand his intentions and motivations and write from that place. Because often things that are our perceived flaws, they really are just us as human beings trying to do our best, also acting within our own sometimes perceived limitations, which can create things to look more intense than they are. So then we respond in a way that maybe isn't appropriate, and that's how flaws can emerge. And this is why I say having a basis in psychology can be really good for writing characters. But I'm going to explain how it can also not be good. So understand the difference between experiential and textbook-based knowledge. So aka this is street smarts versus book smarts. The reason why I say this is because some characters like Ramona or the characters in Inner Space Boy like Aiden and Stella, like I said, they're based off real people. So therefore, they're based in experience. So the characters that I write about I have experiential knowledge to be able to write them from there. And that is valuable. That's why they're going to just naturally, it's going to flow easier for me to write them. But textbook-based knowledge, it is valuable, but if you write all of your stories or characters from textbook-based knowledge, this is where you have the problem, like the characters come across a little bit too like stereotypes of characters. So say like you want to have a certain character in your book of a specific race, and then you don't actually know somebody personally like that, so then you just write them based off stereotypes. Then you got yourself in all kinds of hot water because you might have meant well, but if you're going based off of what would be considered even textbook based knowledge, now you're getting mixed into the world of like if you read about certain things on the internet, or you're just piecing things together off of what society has told you about specific races to be able to write a character. You then have that problem of creating like a it just becomes a stereotype, and that can put a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, and it also just doesn't ring true, and it feels really hokey and fake when you have that stereotype there. And early on, you could see I had some of this with ET Girl even. Like, I'm not perfect. I did it as well. When I was originally writing ET Girl, you know, she gets abducted on the spacecraft and she was like, oh, don't probe me. And that is like the most stereotypical line for someone who is been abducted by aliens, and that would, you know, that's their first thought. I mean, just from what I keep hearing about all the anecdotal stories about alien abductions, whether or not that's like actually what happens, or like whether or not that's the actual like a fair stereotype for the alien phenomenon, you know, even for those who have been in like an experience where they feel they had been abducted, and or for those who are more hardcore like abduction enthusiasts, they might read that as like fake or hokey or just not kind of genuine. So I kind of shied away from more of that stereotypical language and modified as I went along. So yeah, so what I recommend is definitely write from both experiential and textbook-based knowledge, but make sure you don't lean too hardly in one direction or the other. The reason why textbook-based knowledge can be useful over experiential knowledge as well, like the reason why it's important to have both, is because textbook-based knowledge can be something like perhaps you have a lot of good awareness about it, but you don't have any practice doing it in your own life. So an example of that might be something like maybe you've read about the concept of narcissists and you want to create a character in your story that is based off of a narcissist. Then having that textbook-based knowledge of like what are the DSM things that like I think it's 8 or 9 DSM qualifications for a narcissist, reading those things can be helpful in building your character, especially if you don't have experiential-based knowledge. If you have experiential-based knowledge, I think that can also help it. It also can be extremely healing to you if you have gone through something like that, to be able to write from experience, as much as you might not want to go there. Understand that, that actually could be really healing for you. So to take that into consideration. But always use them in conjunction with each other, and don't lean too heavily on one or the other. So having textbook-based knowledge can be really useful. I also think textbook-based knowledge is useful in stuff like the next concept, which would be study relationships, like the way people relate. I would recommend studying personality types, just because having those personality types, as long as you understand that to be flexible within them, they can help you inform your character's behaviors, so you know how they interact with one another. And like I said, make sure you're adding experiential knowledge into it. But personality typing can be really cool to figure out just how people kind of interact on like a basic level. Also, study attachment styles or love languages to flesh out your character motivations, because something like if you feel a certain character is, say, like anxious, just the way you're writing them, well, maybe now that knowing that the character feels anxious and you give them an anxious attachment style, you could go back to their childhood and flesh out why that is. And since there's a lot of studies on how anxious attachment style forms from childhood, this could really inform you about how the character's upbringing was before you even knew it. So then it gives you like a good baseline to kind of help fill that in. Love languages can be really good too. If you decide to study love languages for writing characters, then this could help create more compelling characters in the way that, say like you've got a girl who's dating a guy, but she likes another guy. You got a typical love triangle situation. You don't have to make the one that she's dating evil, and in order for her to be able to be with the other guy that, that we know as the audience, we want her to be with, right? And that's a big trope, is making, she's just trapped in a bad relationship, or something like that, or she can't choose between them, and one of them's good, one of them's bad. Instead, you can use love languages as something to show that perhaps the only reason why they're not compatible is because they don't know that they are speaking different love languages. And maybe the one character is always showing his love by acts of service, and the other character is showing her love with gifts. And because they haven't communicated that, or they don't know it about each other, they keep perceiving it as as the other doesn't care. And then there you've got real, drama and tension based in real things that people go through, but it's not so extreme, like the person is an absolute villain. So that helps create more character believability as well. The next aspect I would highly recommend is use yourself and your friends as beta readers to gauge reactions and feelings that they may get about the character, and also make sure to give them a unique voice. So I say this because sometimes you might have a friend read a character that you intend to be the love interest, and they read him and they're like, wow, this guy reads to me like, is he going to be the villain of the story? Or they might read the main character and be like, wow, she's really like dumb, or she doesn't seem to care about people, or she never seems to have anything go wrong for her. And so like, yeah, it might be hard to hear these things from your friends, but like just go into it the mindset of asking specifically like for how they feel, like what's the feeling they get based off the character, how they would label them if they believe that they're the hero or the villain of the story, or perhaps if they feel more like a supporting character as opposed to the main character. Like just make sure you guide them as to what you're asking for, so then they're not just kind of going all over the place. And then just kind of like prep yourself for being open to the criticism for the feedback. And also, yeah, use yourself too. Something I've done many, many times is there are certain plots for the ET Girl storyline that I have written and rewritten over and over again, and I sort of view them in my head as a movie as I'm working on them and as I'm scripting them out. And I gauge in my body how it feels as I'm telling the story to myself. And this is because the brain doesn't actually really understand the difference between memories and like the past or the present, or even just things you think up. This is why stuff like catastrophizing works, like not a good way. Like we can catastrophize, or we can have shared trauma experiences even with someone who we weren't there when the trauma happened, just by them telling us about it, because the brain can't tell the difference sometimes. So if you're seeing it, you're visualizing it in your head, then your brain thinks it's happening. So that means that the same like physical body responses, the feelings you get from seeing it in your head, is the same as if it was something that was happening right in front of you, like an actual thing that's going to be a memory later. So that's useful for you in writing story, because that means as you're working on story in your head, yeah, gauge how your body feels when you're writing about it. Gauge to see if you are getting excited or nervous for your characters, or if you're wanting to know more, or you're getting sad, stuff like that. Because then you know that the writing is compelling. And if you don't feel those things, then you know that's an area to work on. And for me, another great example is like romance has always been my favorite topic to write, but it's also my favorite because I know the least about it in terms of like writing it in a way that feels genuine, because I think that it took all the way up till now in my life to really feel it as genuine. And so what that means was I could write romance from some experiences, but a lot of those experiences were not truly good examples in order to write how real romantic tension could be created. And then also I was writing from a lot of textbook-based things I had read about it. So for me, it's been this amazing journey to see how my interest in wanting to reflect true and compelling love and romance and stories is now going to hopefully have more believability now that I feel I've gained more confidence in understanding how that works. So now I can write from that place. So this leads us into the last one, and this would be using the law of attraction in order to write more compelling characters. This sounds really weird, but I think that it can be beneficial. So the baseline idea of law of attraction is more so that like everything you see and perceive in the world really is truly a reflection of your internal world. And what that means is your internal world and how you feel, that informs your behaviors. And when those behaviors come out, then they draw certain people to you or push certain people away. So people like, the whole misery loves company thing. If people like to complain a lot, then you'll be able to find more complainers that want to commiserate with you. But then when something good happens to you, the commiserators are not going to be interested in applauding you or cheering you on. This is something Brene Brown talks about. So when we flip that mindset where we decide we are not going to prioritize or put commiserating on a pedestal, but instead we put celebrating our achievements. So we work on that inner work where we start learning how to be self-supportive. Then suddenly when we're being kind and supportive to ourselves, and then now we're rejoicing with others in positivity on their successes, then that means for sure if you've got something that happens that you're proud of, you're going to already be surrounded with people that are going to cheer you on, because it's something that you worked on within, and then you know, like attracts like. So law of attraction can be useful for a story, because if you know the way something functions, or you've learned the way something functions, not just what you know, but perhaps it's something that you're actively learning, you can still be in process with these things and still write about them. Just kind of think that it can come from within, but it also can go the other way too. You know, your subconscious is very deep, and it has a lot to tell you about you and your characters. And each character also, remember, they're all just parts of you. Even the ones I said that I base off of real people, that's just based off of my perception of them. So in the end, it's still me. It's still what I see as them, and it might not truly be them. And even in that can be beautiful, because then I can show that person how I see them, and vice versa. So yeah, hopefully this video was helpful for you today, and a little bit unorthodox for writing compelling characters, but it's fun and it's a creative journey, and I hope that it helped you out. And drop me a comment below if there's any other tips or tricks you've used to write compelling characters.